Hey everybody, I'm Joe Cruz. I'm Williams College class of 1991, and I've been at the college again for the last 20 years as a faculty member in the philosophy department and in the program in cognitive science.
So, you're here at Williams now, and you obviously went to Williams. What are like three things that brought you to the college in the first place when you were a student here?
I had an image in my mind of what a college experience could be. I'm not sure that image was grounded in facts or reality, but I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and then I'd gone to high school in Miami, and I was picturing this. I was picturing a Robert Frost poem. I was picturing ivy on the buildings and rolling hills into the horizon, and visited Williams as a prospective student, as a first-gen prospective student, and it certainly met the fantastical imagery. So that's one thing that brought me to Williams. Another thing that brought me to Williams was this idea that college could be a conversation between students and faculty and a community in a really intimate way. And it turned out that way for me at Williams, and I try to be part of that community now. And I'd say a third thing that brought me to Williams was the sense that it could be a blend of serious ideas, but also the living that we do as real human beings that isn't always abstract and isn't always literature and equations, but is about people. And it was very much that as well. I would never try to say that other places are worse or deeply different from Williams, but I most certainly had the feeling on the Williams campus that people cared about each other, and people wanted to stop and hear a story or trade an idea or have a debate over a meal, and that spending time with people outside of the classroom and being in a place where that could be achieved with comfort and respect and kindness was, to me, written on the community. It was legible on the community.
What's kept you at Williams? You sort of seems like you haven't had enough of Williams when you were a student. What made you, I guess, come back or stay here?
Yeah, that's easy. I feel like I have the best job in the world. I spend every day with smart 20-year-olds who want to press the limits of their own thinking. They want to express their creativity and passion and analytical skills, and I get to be part of that. And being part of that has literally made every day here special for me, because it, every day is precious. It's a day when I can have a conversation with students I care about, and where I can think about the things that I want to think about, and things that I care about academically, intellectually, politically, socially. I can think about those things in a rigorous and careful way.
What about like choosing your sort of line of work now and your sort of, academic concentration? What was your thought process going into that? What sort of inspired you?
I was excited about the rigorousness of the computer science and the math that I was studying. I was driven by the humanistic themes and the English classes and history classes that I was taking, and philosophy was the intersection of those two for me. A kind of rigorousness alongside humane questions, alongside questions that are meaningful beyond the narrow interest of academic life, but that can be about the world. So that's what I thought it was then. I still think it's that. It still motivates me in that register. And I'm glad to have had a chance to keep doing it. I mean, it's a privilege to keep doing it, going to graduate school, earning a PhD, getting invited to come back to the Williams community.
If Williams was an ice cream flavor, which one do you think it would be?
Wouldn't it be some fruity flavor that corresponds with the color purple? Like, wouldn't it be, some purple ice cream that's maybe a blueberry raspberry combination? And that would be fun from the perspective of the college's colors, but it would also be fun from the perspective of thinking of how it's a blend. It's a combination of values and peoples and place, and you want that complexity in the flavor. I don't think it would just be one flavor. It wouldn't just be chocolate. It wouldn't just be pistachio. You'd want it
because
to be
there's no such thing as a purple flavor.
Yeah.
So you would want it to be two different ones, and you get the purple out of it.
Exactly. Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a synthesis.
So going back to sort of your line of work and philosophy, like, what is one thing that really fascinates you sort of in your department?
You're kind, by the way, to call it a line of work, and I suppose I do get paid for it, and I wouldn't want them to stop paying me for it. But it doesn't feel like work when it's happening. It's when you're in a classroom, or even when you're sitting by yourself working on an essay on a philosophical project of your own, that doesn't feel like work. That feels like what we can aspire to as thinkers, as creative people, as folks animated by questions that can seem abstract in the first presentation, but actually then have these connections to meaningful parts of life. So fascinating in my department. I mean, the Williams Philosophy Department teaches across a range of kinds of philosophy. It's more global than it ever was. I have a chance to co-teach courses on Indian philosophy and philosophy that is an inheritance from Buddhism, although that's of course not my background, and I learned so much from my co-teacher, Professor Dreyfus, on that. What fascinates me too about what's going on in my department is that philosophy is always in dialogue with the sciences. The philosophy that's nearest to my areas of expertise are those parts that make contact with cognitive psychology, with AI research, with neuroscience. And so that drives me, because it calls on me to be serious about what's happening in the empirical literature, about articles that are published, in the last year or two, right? I do for sure teach courses where we read hundreds of years old texts, but I also have a chance to share with students stuff that I come across from 2019, 2020, and that's that freshness, that interaction, that interdisciplinarity between philosophy and, for me, science is a crucial part of how we ought to think about ourselves.
So that's really interesting, because I think when I came into Williams, I thought that philosophy was one of the more like older school, like let's look at a text from 1,000 years ago and how do people think about life. But you're saying that there is interesting work being done in the last couple of years. So what is an example of that work? You mentioned AI and some intersection with science and technology. Could you give a few examples?
Yeah, and by the way, you weren't wrong to it may be the outsider's perspective or the beginner's perspective on philosophy, but it isn't wrong, because philosophy always tries to keep some kind of contact with its own history and with the wisdom that we shouldn't lose track of from centuries of global reflection on the human condition. And so you weren't wrong, but there are chances to have philosophy be in dialogue with contemporary work in the sciences and in broader reflection on culture. So last year I taught a course on the ethics of AI, and that course was timely in all the obvious ways, where we're moving toward technologies that will rival ourselves in cognitive capacity, in sort of dynamic engagement with the world. We're moving toward technologies where a kind of insight will be encoded in systems that we've created, but that have the potential to be out of our control, and out of our control in a positive way. They might have a certain autonomy, but also out of our control in a daunting way, where we have to think about our relation to these technologies. And of course, they exist already in the kinds of deep learning systems and the kinds of big data systems that already play a massive role in our lives. But as that as the role of AI increases in on the global landscape, there are going to be serious questions about our relationship to those technologies, what they should do, where they should go, how we should understand their limits and their power over us. So that's one kind of example of a current conversation. I think every article that I assigned for that course last year was published after the year 2000, and most of them came from after 2016, right? And that's never true for philosophy, or that's hardly ever true for a philosopher to be able to have a syllabus that feels so current. And that's one kind. That's a philosopher reflecting. That's philosophers reflecting on a current piece of technology. But if I can mention another way that philosophy can be in dialogue with contemporary work, the kind of philosophy that I do includes thinking about the nature of mind and consciousness, and what consciousness is, how it is that we can have subjective experience as a result of the flesh and blood bodies that we have, the nervous systems that can be understood by neuroscience, but that give us a perspective on ourselves from the third person rather than the first person conscious experience that we have of our living waking life. And that's an occasion for speculative philosophy, for a kind of creative philosophy to make contact with, as I say, the latest results in the neuroscience of consciousness, or in the cognitive psychology of consciousness. So that's another way in which philosophy can be in conversation with stuff that's happening right now in working labs around the world. For me, philosophical questions are most interesting when they provide a way for making sense of what the answer might be, right? I don't want philosophy, at least the kind of philosophy I care most about, I don't want it to be these timeless open questions where we can't even conceive of how those questions might get an answer, right? There's maybe something entertaining about that way of thinking about our intellectual lives, but I want to see some ways that we can make sense of ourselves, some durable ways where we want to transform philosophy into science, or kind of rigorous reflection on what we are and what our horizons are. So not every philosopher would say it that way, and not all my colleagues see it that way, not by a long shot. But for me, the best philosophy is the kind that will someday not even be philosophy, but it will count as something else. It'll count as science.
If you were explaining your most recent or most interesting research topic or research work to a 5-year-old, what would that sound like?
Yeah, this is so fun because it's not just a thought exercise for me. I actually have tried to explain the work I do to my little niece. She's 8 now, but I tried out some of these ideas in years past, and I think I said something like this: I'm trying to understand what consciousness and thought is. That is, I'm trying to understand how we think, and we're animals just like many other beings in this universe are animals, lots of non-human animals. We think of our favorite animals, and I'm trying to understand what thought is in its most basic form. So I'm trying to understand how the family dog sees the world. I'm trying to understand the emotions of the animals that we see in nature. I'm trying to make sense of how thinking in its most, I would never use this word for a 5-year-old, but thinking in its most basal, fundamental sense. And the way I'd say that is, I just want to understand the mind of animals in the way that the animals experience their minds, not how we experience them, but how they themselves conceive of, see, have emotions about the world. And so those are the kinds of stories that I've had a chance to exchange with my niece, Judy.
And do you have any advice for Williams students trying to get into academia? I think it's a very popular career choice for a lot of Williams folks. Any advice for those trying to sort of go down your route?
So the first thing I'd want to say is be honest, be open-eyed about the challenges that you'll face in going through grad school and finding at the other end that the economic situation in higher education is more complicated than it ever was for your professors, and that's something that's going to take reflection. I wouldn't want to put it so pessimistically as saying that you have to have a backup plan, but it is worth being honest and reflective about the possibilities after a PhD, because you want to have as wide an imagination of those possibilities as you can. I know it sounds like a downer, but I do want to, I also want to say that it's a life of a certain kind of intellectual freedom and a life of being able to think about the things that you want to think about, and that's a rare and wonderful gift. So I understand the craving. I understand why someone would want to, but it has to be tempered with an honesty about what opportunities will be there.
And what if you could be an ice cream flavor? Which one would you be?
So like there's interference from my favorite ice cream flavors. My favorite ice cream flavors are, well, I like the maple creamies up here in Vermont. I actually live over the Vermont border, and for those who don't know, maple creamies are maple flavored soft serve ice cream, and so I've come to love that Vermont creation. But I don't think that's me. I think that's just what I respond to in consuming ice cream. Yeah, if I was an ice cream flavor, I'd almost want to change it. I'd almost want to be those ices, those flavored ices that I used to eat as a kid. Sometimes rainbow flavored, sometimes lemon flavored. I used to get them. My parents used to bring me to these icy stands in the streets of New York, where it's shaved ice that you get in a paper cone. And like the Puerto Rican neighborhood that I grew up in, that was our summertime. That's what I'd want to be if I was a flavor of icy dessert. That would be
right. And then just to close off, what would your bumper sticker say?
I wanted to keep experiencing.